Hello guys and gals, and welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. Now, when do we do a Paperboy creepypasta? Let me think. Oh, wait, never! This is our first Paperboy creepypasta. In fact, Paperboy and Paperboy 2. What could be creepy about a Paperboy? A game about delivering papers? Well, honestly, there could be a lot of things, but let's go right into what this creepypasta could be detailing. This is a Paperboy 2 creepypasta, simply known as A Figure in Gray. What could this figure in gray be doing? Well, sit back, relax, and let's see what this creepypasta has to offer. If you have spent any length of time in the United States, you owe it to yourself to play the 1985 arcade classic, Paperboy. In it, you assume the role of a preteen boy tasked with completing his daily paper route. For whatever reason, your hero's beat is a particularly rough neighborhood. Its streets teem with aggressive drivers who would rather hit a cyclist than their brakes. On the sidewalks, bratty children steer kamikaze RC cars into passerbys, modern-day drone pilots in their larval form. Elsewhere, skateboarding adrenaline junkies find their greatest thrill in demolishing live obstacles like your Paperboy. In some cases, your character will be accosted by a knife-wielding madman who comes charging out of a house and pursues at tremendous speed, inevitably catching your hero and robbing him of a precious life. Taken as a whole, the game makes for an effective satire of Reagan-era America. It captures the needless paranoia of the suburbs, where people fear the harm some stranger or foreign power will inflict on them, without realizing the vanity, in all senses of the word, behind such a phobia. It shows the violence and cruelty of the average American percolating behind the facade of white picket fences and well-maintained lawns. Most importantly, it reveals how far some people will go to make a buck, or be compelled to go, for socioeconomic reasons beyond their control. It would be troubling to consider these situations if the game didn't make it all so damn funny. Odds are you will laugh too much while playing to think of many of the concerns the game raises. Perhaps it succeeds too well at its own satirical objectives. You'd be forgiven for assuming that the merry cynicism found in Paperboy would carry over to its 90s console sequel, Paperboy 2. Indeed, the second entry in the series contains every bit as much unnecessary peril and consequent weird humor as the first. You guide your choice of Paperboy or Papergirl through a suburban gauntlet featuring a whole new cast of memorable hostiles. A hermit holed up in a moat-ringed castle bombards you with cannon fire as you pass. Overzealous guard dogs chase you down the streets. Roasting pigs, knocked off the spit by a misfired newspaper, do the same, evidently being grilled alive before your intervention, and none too happy with your interference. Runaway baby carriages, in a nod to the overpopulation worries of the modern world, mow you down if you are not attentive enough. Scarecrows, once hit with a paper, break from their stakes and ambush you, one hand raised in a fascist salute all the while. The absurdity in Paperboy 2 runs high thanks to the game's colorful cast, although perhaps colorful is not the right word. As you play through the opening stages of Paperboy 2, you will notice one character who does not seem to belong, for he is literally and figuratively anything but colorful. He will first catch your eye because his palette is without color. He is the only person in the game rendered entirely in monochrome. He wears a gray sweatshirt. His neat and unremarkable hair is black. His stark white skin, however, is especially arresting, given the more nuanced flesh tone seen elsewhere in-game. His actions, too, are comparably bland. If left undisturbed, the figure in gray simply walks down his driveway, deposits a garbage can at the curb, then turns around and walks back to the house. If struck with a paper, he only freezes in his tracks. No attacks, no surprises. He is shockingly mundane in this world of cannons and mobile scarecrows. If you have some knowledge of 90s news curiosities, you might be able to excavate the unusual case of one Dennis R. from your memory banks.
Assuming the national news outlets had the story straight and reported it accordingly, Mr. R was an actuary. Or some other specialist whose profession hinges on the unchallenged yet speculative assumption that the future will be like the past. Who woke up one night, disremembered his infant twin sons and his wife of 8 years, and brought their remains to the curb in a metal garbage can. Alongside all the other refuse of suburban life, the mechanical arm of the waste collection truck had not detected the can's abnormal weight, and the landfill too was none the wiser. It was entirely possible that nobody would have noticed the absence of Mrs. R and her children, had the local library not began to see compensation for a long overdue book that Mrs. R never had the chance to return. Alas, Mr. R was never properly sentenced, as he was killed in person by other inmates before his trial could be finished. Recalling the story, you might begin to see a resemblance between the late Mr. R and the figure in gray. Indeed. After a cursory image search for his photograph on the internet, you'd be impressed at how uncanny a likeness a few pixels can produce. You might even begin to suspect that the satire of the Paperboy series is alive and well in the second installment. Here, the game designers have given you a world of crime and violence and fright. And yet the most horrifying thing in it is something as innocuous as a man taking out his trash. Here, all the paranoid suburbanites target a kid on the bicycle, as if he or she posed any actual threat, while the real danger lurks next door. You might speculate that Paperboy 2 is a satire of complacency, or prosperity and habit, and you are the average American against diligence and introspection, where the idealized image of the suburb discourages its residents from looking beyond the glistening veneer of civilization and scrutinizing themselves or others. Even you, the attentive player, were fooled. Did you think to inspect the gray figure's garbage can for pixelated limbs? Of course not. Now why would you? The world you find yourself in does little to suggest you should have. Therefore, through the inclusion of this nonchalant figure in gray, the game makes you complicit in the poisonous mindset that suburban America incubates. A mature critique, indeed, for such an early video game. Yet if you were to praise the developers of Paperboy 2 for their clever stunt, not one of them would take credit for it, for none of them would admit to drawing or programming the figure in gray. In fact, none of them would remember putting him into the game at all.
Okay, remember when I told you about how when you make a gaming creepypasta, it's best you take something inside the game and make it the focus. Find a way to make it shine. Well, this did exactly that, but in my opinion, in the wrong ways. Now what I mean by this is the fact that this ended up playing out like a theory rather than making a creepypasta out of Paperboy, and that isn't wrong. We've done theorypastas before. You know, we looked at the Earthbound abortion theory, but even in that case, this wasn't even on that level. In fact, this is, well, we'll get to what it really is at the end of it. Now, it didn't involve a ROM or anything of a weird cart or sorts, you know, it didn't involve you going to a GameStop or a, you know, whatever kind of shop, getting a game from some crazy, you know, clerk and bringing it home. No. It was in fact just a standard version of the game that anyone really has. And Paperboy 2, I assume many of us have played it. You know, if you played video games back in the past, it's a rather fun game, and it definitely is goofy, as his creepypasta definitely states. But moving on back to the creepypasta, it honestly would have been more creepy if there was more self-containment. What I mean by that is if it relied more on the game to deliver a scare. You know, hence, when you're covering a creepypasta, you'd rather have elements in the game constantly affect the player, rather than taking a little chunk out of it and blowing it up to such magnitude. Let's be honest, the elements here aren't exactly scary in any sense, and the references are pretty obscure, to be honest. In fact, I could not find a case of this individual that was mentioned in the creepypasta. When I rang up the name, all I could find was the BTK killer, Dennis Rader, who ironically is named BTK Killer because of the method he had used in killing his victims, which is bind, torture, and kill. And this was all there was, and that clearly isn't the case this one is referencing to, because none of what this creepypasta mentioned on that person matched up with what this person did. Now, of course, when we got to the end of the creepypasta, Des wouldn't know, because this is literally Illuminati confirmed levels of theory. And that doesn't really work well. In fact, it's barely going back down to a shitpost. I wouldn't go all the way there because, let's be honest here, there was a bit of element that kept you intrigued. And there is a little bit of eerie creepiness to it, when you really think about it. But the referencing should have been there. You could have made Paperboy 2 scary, and you didn't have to go to a very cliched route to do it, but this wasn't the right way. This was the wrong way to utilize something very minuscule in the game and blowing it up to a lot of these arbitrary proportions that really it shouldn't have even went there. In the end, what would you rate this, and what would you change to make it better? Please let me know in the comments below. You've heard my analysis. I'm not exactly too thrilled with it. This is me, Mudahar, and this has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.